Hey everyone, welcome to the Prophecy Roundtable. We don't promise to have all the answers, but we are going to have an interesting and engaging conversation. Tonight we are looking at World War III. Probably not, hopefully. Who is Gog? Who is Rosh? What does that word actually mean? Is it Ezekiel 38, 39 already? These are the big questions that we're going to take a look at. And of course, to dig into these amazing ideas, we have John Haller here, and we did have Scott. He disappeared. So, well, John,
let's talk about Scott for a while.
There we go. Let's talk about him. That'd be perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, man, there's been a lot happening. I managed to catch your prophecy update the other day. That was quite interesting. Very interesting.
Now you're messed up.
Well, thank you for the shout out. I appreciate it.
So
that was kind of.
So maybe we can. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how you want to approach this tonight, so I'll let you sort of take the lead. But I have some ideas as to what we should do, maybe. And
no, go ahead. Go ahead. That'd be awesome.
And we can really muddy up the waters. So maybe we ought to talk about the different views that are out there, and try to be as fair as we can about each one of them. For who Gog and Magog is. So
okay.
I don't know where you want to start. Why don't we start with, I would almost call it the supernatural view.
Okay.
That I would attribute it to someone like Mike Heiser, Dr. Mike Heiser, in his book Unseen Realm. And I don't know if it's fair to call it a supernatural view, but his view, I was just looking at it a little bit today. So if I mischaracterize it, please go get his books in Unseen Realm and some of the others and see what he really says. But his view is sort of that when Ezekiel was writing, maybe before we get to the views, maybe we ought to talk about what was the perspective that Ezekiel was writing from. You know, I mean, I know that there's inspiration of scripture and everything, but it also brings in what the person knows or has experienced. And so this is a question, I think I might have mentioned this in my update Sunday, is that what do you look at? Is it just purely geography? Is it a map? Is it people groups? Is it based on what, Ezekiel knew and what he would have been talking about? Like what would have been and what's the best translation for these things? So it talks about the remote parts of the north in one translation, that this is where Gog and Magog comes from. But I think Heiser in his book, he takes the view that could mean the heights of the north, meaning that, trouble in Israel, the attacks always came from the north. The Assyrians came from the north. The 3 Babylonian waves came from the north. So trouble always came from the north. And so that when he was writing, he would have thought, well, it's the north, and he would have been thinking the mountain. And Heiser has written a lot about Mount Hermon, and I think you write about it too, Doug. Maybe you can flesh this out a little bit about sort of what was Ezekiel? What did Ezekiel have in mind? And also, you have to keep in mind Ezekiel was writing it from Babylon and not from Israel. So, what do you think?
Yeah. So when I'm looking at that, the word, the farthest reaches of the north is Yarchete Tzafon, right? And that phrase we actually find in Psalm 48, where it's talking about the beloved city. It's talking about Jerusalem. And in that passage, it's clearly not talking about something that is far north. It's talking about the new Jerusalem. So based on that, I would suggest that this is not necessarily only a geography perspective, but this may be a spiritual reference. In other words, this host that's coming from Yarchete Tzafon, from the farthest reaches of the north, it is not merely a physical entity, but really could involve, and almost certainly would involve, a
spiritual component.
Some kind of a spiritual compound. I just want to show people there in Psalm 48, because then you really get the whole sense here. So beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion, on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. All right, where else do we find this very passage? So there in the Hebrew, it's the term Yachetei Tzafon. All right, well, where else do we find it? Interestingly, we find it in Isaiah 14. Or Isaiah, here we go. So how you have fallen to the ground, for you've said in your heart, I'm going to do all this stuff on the farthest sides of the north. All right, so that's the same term that we find there. So when Satan is saying this in Isaiah 14, he's not exclusively in a human or an earthly environment. I would actually suggest that when you take a look at the way things were before the fall, that he was actually, or that the New Jerusalem was touching the earth, that these two realms, the earthly realm and the heavenly realm, were together. They were all one big happy family. And then after Satan did his stuff and we have the fall of the garden, that's when you have this disconnect. All right. So based on those two passages in Psalm 48 and Isaiah 14, then we can come to the passage there in Ezekiel chapter 38, where it's talking about how they're going to come from the far north. Right here it is, from the far north, and once again it is Yachetei Tzafon, right? So it's the same phrase. All right, so it doesn't prove that this has to be a spiritual matter, but it greatly suggests that it probably is a spiritual matter. And based on that, and also when we start looking and understanding that Ezekiel 38 and 39 are really one and the same as the Battle of Armageddon, or the ramp up to it, if you will, that we're talking about the same thing. All right. So in Revelation 16, what do we find there? Well, that the whole world is going to come. Okay. So it says, I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are the spirits of demons performing signs, which go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to battle of that great day of God Almighty. Right. So that's how I would put it together, John, is that we're really looking at, these are one and the same thing. Ezekiel is getting a window into the spiritual realm, and the term Yachetei Tzafon is much more of a reference to a spiritual place or a spiritual horde of beings. We also see the same horde of beings coming out of the abyss in Revelation chapter 9, right? And clearly they're coming out of a different dimension, right? They don't belong in this dimension. So that's what I would do.
But some people would put, well, then there's the other issue too that I forgot about is this Ezekiel 38, 39. I mean, I saw this week, people would talk about is what's going on. Is this the beginning of Gog Magog and Russia and Ukraine and that type of thing? And then somebody comes in to just kind of put an end to the conversation, like, well, the only Gog Magog is in the end of Revelation, at the end of the millennium. But then I think there's some differences there that they don't deal with. They just sort of gloss over some of the details. For example, it says that after this battle, they will burn the weapons for 7 years. And I just don't see them. Why is that a detail that would really have application at the end of the millennium? I'm not sure how that all works out. I think that's a big difference. And then the question becomes, is Gog the Antichrist or not the Antichrist? And the only thing that I would say is the detail in Ezekiel is they bury Gog in the valley of Hermon, I believe. But I don't think but the Antichrist, we know in Revelation, is thrown alive with the false prophet together into the lake of fire. So I think that's a distinct difference. I think that's an issue that needs to be dealt with, I guess, is the best thing to say.
I would totally agree with you. And I did write a book on this, little plug here, Corrupt the Image Volume 3. People get that on Amazon.
Which I have, and I'm working through, is very good, by the way.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I mentioned that because when you get on a show like this, it's hard to get into all the nuances, right? And there's so many nuances, right? So here's the bottom line. The ancient Jews, the rabbis, they understood that Gog would be the ultimate bad guy in the end times, okay? And he would only be defeated by Messiah. All right, so we completely agree. I mean, I completely agree with them on that point. So for those people that are holding this idea that Gog and Rosh might refer to Russia, that's what I grew up with, John. I think you're in the same boat. That maybe that's where you used to hang out. Well,
let me clarify. Yeah,
okay.
Let me clarify, because I've been accused of certain things, like I'm a promoter of Joel Richardson, and
fair enough.
We know he's not that bright. And it's like, listen, I think that there's a lot of ideas that are worthy of consideration. And my view in prophecy, in fact, I was just talking to a prophecy friend expert tonight. And one of the points we made too is that sometimes we have a tendency as to how these things are going to work out to get incredibly dogmatic and divisive. And if you don't see it my way, you're just a complete idiot, and it gets very the ad hominems start flying, and I don't like that. So I try to consider all these views. So the one is, so let's go back. So we have this sort of the spiritual view that I would think Heiser has adopted, and other people, and they limit Magog to this place of the north that I think in geographic terms would have been like Mount Hermon, or to the north, to the mountains of Syria, Turkish border. That would be, in Ezekiel's day, that would have been as far as he would have thought to the north. I do think there's a physical thing, though, because it talks about a great company and a mighty army and that type of thing that are happening in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So we know that there's this back and forth, this battle, this great company, mighty army, the hooks in the jaw, and all this stuff. And so there's not a lot of, I think the thing is wide open for a lot of speculation, and it just depends which track you want to go as to the way you're going to end up. And so I'm going to be honest with you. This week, I'm sort of sitting here like, do I need to maybe rethink this a little bit? Because I think that, and we'll talk about it as we go forward, I think you might be able to make a case, and not be crazy, wild, nutty, that this Russia thing may be a big deal in Bible prophecy. It may be. I don't know. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out. And the other thing is, we don't know the timing. I don't think there's a great.
Mm-hmm.
There's no timestamp on this thing, and it talks about, these things happen, like it does in Ezekiel 37, I think into 36. This will happen, and we know that this will happen over a period of time. It may be a longer period of time. It may be compressed, and then it just kind of jumps to the end, and then they'll know that I am their God, that I am the Lord their God. And it's sort of like, well, is there a little bit of a gap in there? Because it seems like there's a lot of other things that have to happen to kind of fill in where they get from this to, and then they will know. And I think that phrase is also in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And but this is just how I kind of approach it and try to work through it.
Right. Well, I think
now Scott here, he's going to clean everything up here.
Yeah, I think we should be absolutely clear that no one is saying that what is happening with Russia is not significant, right? I mean, I would be the first to say that it's absolutely significant, even though I don't believe that Rosh is Russia. I just don't think that makes sense at all. I take the word Rosh. For those that may not know, it says chief there, the word is Rosh. And so some translations, King James, New King James, suggest, they're not really sure, but they leave it as Roos or something like that.
So we sort of started with the spiritual view. Now let's talk about, you want to talk about your view of it, Doug, on where you think this Gog person comes from, who he is?
Yeah. So
And we'll put you on the clock. I'll tell you when you're done. So.
Thank you. Nice. So the thing that really got me as I was looking at this is, God is saying about Gog. He says, "Are you not?" He says, "You will come against my people Israel like a cloud, and in the latter days I'll bring you against my land." And he says, "Are you he of whom I have spoken in former days by my servants, the prophets of Israel, who prophesied for years in those days that I would bring you against them?" Now, aside from Ezekiel, I can't find any other prophet that is talking about Gog. All right. So I'm not sure what God is getting at, but when I went and looked at the actual meaning of the name Gog, I went back to the ancient Sumerian. For people that may not know, Sumerian is probably the oldest language in the world. All right. It's the oldest written language for sure. There may be others who would contest something else.
In that language, Doug, just so people can put it in geographically, where would that language have developed and grown?
Yeah, so when it talks about the land of Shinar and Sumer are exactly the same thing. This is Mesopotamia. Shinar means the two rivers, so this is Mesopotamia, right? So this is where Abraham originated from, that basic area. All right, so that's the area of Sumer, right? So in Sumerian language, when you take a look at this word, in Sumerian, it's Gug, because there's no letter O. It's death or enmity. All right, that blew my mind when I made that discovery, and it fits in. I mean, in Genesis 3:15, I will cause enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, right? And suddenly I was like, oh, if it means death or enmity, then it's talking about the guy who has always been into death and enmity, who is the grand enemy of them all, right? That is Satan. And Gog is going to be just an avatar of Satan. He'll be basically Satan in the flesh, if you will. And I talk about this commingling of Satan and this guy named the Beast, that they are going to become essentially one in the end times. All right. So once I had that key, then I felt like it solved the whole problem. And it also solves the issue with Revelation chapter 20, because then you just have Satan coming back, right? He's doing his stuff like he's always been doing, right? So that's, for me, it's not a problem. It solves all these other problems, because now we're not looking for some human named Gog, but we're looking for this entity, Satan, who has a lot of names in Scripture, and Gog is just one more of them. It's a very descriptive. It's an incredibly old name of this individual and what he's been up to all this time.
Well, is Gog mentioned elsewhere in Scripture, though? I mean, we know we have the Revelation reference at the end of the millennium.
Yeah. So
is it mentioned in the Table of Nations in Genesis?
There is a reference there. It doesn't seem to do much. I mean, it's just kind of, there's just a name, right? So actually it's in 1 Corinthians 5:4. Gog was the son of Joel and of the line of Reuben. Okay. So actually, I don't think Gog is actually in the Table of Nations, if I remember correctly. But
is Magog in there?
Magog is, because Magog
okay.
became a place, but Gog was not. So we do have a later name of Gog in First Chronicles, excuse me, not First Corinthians, First Chronicles. So Magog is in the Table of Nations. And what I see the Table of Nations, that's where everybody came from, right? Every island tribe came from there. The Japanese people came from there. Americans came from there. The Europeans came from. Everybody came from the Table of Nations. That is telling us our origins, and then they all spread out from there. So I would compare, and what I do in the book is I compare the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10 with Ezekiel's description. I'm like, look, these are the same people because they all spread out from there. And so then what Ezekiel's doing is just taking those same basic tribal groups, if you will, that
and so then
the rest of the world.
Right. Yeah. So then my question on Sunday, I think when I did my update, was I sort of asked the question, was like, so when Ezekiel's describing these people, is he describing them geographically as he understood them, or geographically as they came out of the Table of Nations and migrated to different places?
Yeah, in my opinion, he's describing them as they came out from the Table of Nations.
Okay.
Not necessarily only where they reside, where they resided in his day or today, for that matter.
Okay. So for example, I was talking to an Orthodox Jewish person today, and he asked me this question, like, hey, do you evangelicals, what do you think about Ezekiel 38 and 39? So I told him to listen tonight if he had time, but it would be the middle of the night in Israel anyway. So, but his point was, and so I told him the different views, sort of summarized them. That that Gog would be this sort of the supernatural thing at the north of Israel, and I think that kind of overlays a little bit with another view that like I said, I think it's worthy of consideration. The one thing I always go back to too, guys, is that when these things unfold and happen, they're going to happen in a real existing world. Mm-hmm. So if this is the time, then maybe we'll need to adjust what we think. Now, I don't think that we're at the Ezekiel 38 and 39 thing. I think that we sometimes have a tendency to try to
shoehorn it in.
and make everything imminent. Make everything like it's going to happen tomorrow.
Yep.
And I just don't think that that's a good way to do, because I mean, you see it. You saw it with the blood moons. We see it with, I don't know, that September 23rd sign or whatever it was, and the alignment of the things in the heavens, and this was the fulfillment of that prophecy. So everything is to make it, and that means that the rapture is going to happen tomorrow, or this is going to happen tomorrow. And I'm not comfortable with that type of I can't remember, would that be Pollyanna or Cassandra that would be doing that the world's coming to an end? But I think that's a problem. So we have, but I think that as I look at it, I mean, I think somebody who's convinced of, I heard a few guys, I listened to a few guys yesterday, and their view was that Magog sort of migrated into Russia, spread over towards Eastern Asia. I mean, I think I seem to have a memory of Chuck Missler calling the Great Wall of China the ramparts of Magog, or referring to it that's how it was known historically in some places. And so somebody could say, yeah, this is Magog is Russia. That was the great northern people. And it extended, and I can go into this a little bit later, but, Meshach is Moscow, Rosh is Russia, Tubal is Tbilisi. So that's this one view that it is Russia, and Russia's going to come down. And I think that, somebody, if they can make a fairly compelling case for that. But then there's also the view that it's Eastern Turkey. This is what the Jewish person I talked to today, it's Eastern Turkey up to Georgia. And some people say, well, Tbilisi in Georgia is Tubal. So that's, anyway, I think people can make the case for it.
I hear you. So here's what I'd suggest. When we take a look at Ezekiel 38, 39, we have to look at the entire gambit of that, right? Because if we are just going to start with, well, here are these nations, and so then we're only looking at this sort of Russia and all the Istan countries, then we're going to have a very limited view. But when you start comparing Ezekiel 38, 39 with the Battle of Armageddon, this is actually a question that Scott Mendenhall has. He says, some are saying that Gog-Magog battle is the Battle of Armageddon after the second coming of Yeshua. Is that correct? Well, Scott, that's my view. Okay, so in my view, that's correct. Obviously, other people have different views. But I would say, when you do a comparison, and I do a whole chart in my book where I show Ezekiel 30, 39 and the Battle of Armageddon, they are exactly the same thing. I mean, Ezekiel 38, 39 is a global horde of people that are coming against Israel in the last days. They're led by this really, really bad guy named Gog, whose name means death or enmity. And as far as the rabbis understood it, they're like, he's the ultimate bad guy that's going to come on the earth. And the only guy that can stop him will be the Messiah. And so I completely agree with them on that point. You notice that there's going to be a gigantic earthquake in Israel. We see that in Revelation. We see there's going to be massive hail. We see that in Revelation. We see there's going to be this big dinner for all the birds. You see that in Revelation. And actually where Gog is going to be placed probably is exactly the same place that we see happening to the beast in both Daniel chapter 7 and in Revelation chapter 19, that they're going to be thrown into this place known as Hamon Gog, the horde of Gog, if you will. And it says that this is going to block the way of the travelers. Well, in Isaiah chapter 66, we see that in the early parts of the millennium, people are going to be coming up to Jerusalem, and they're going to be blocked. There's going to be this big area of cadavers that where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched, right? And this is going to block their way as they're going up to worship in Jerusalem. So they're exactly the same place. I mean, I don't know. I took a look at all this stuff. I really nailed it down, in my opinion, obviously. And I think that's where we have to take a look at that. So, but I'll yield. Scott, what do you think? We haven't heard from you.
Yeah, this is a record.
And I don't think we don't hear.
Are you silent? Are you saying anything?
Finally, we got Scott to be silent. That was not easy. I don't know if you can.
You don't have anything to say?
Well, well, finally. I don't know how we did it, John, but we did it.
Virtual duct tape works.
Oh, this is great.
So, well, I mean, let's talk about, so I've seen the charts that show that Ezekiel 38 is they come from this particular area, while in Armageddon, they come from the whole world. How do you deal with that?
Well, once again, if we understand that what Ezekiel is talking about is the same ethnic groups as the Table of Nations, then what that means is that he's simply saying that this group that then branched out into all these different places, and this group that branched it all into these different places, these are going to come back. So it's essentially the whole world is coming back to battle against Israel, right? I mean, you compare it with Zechariah chapters 12 and 14. That talks about the whole world coming against Jerusalem. It's the same thing. So again, what I would suggest is to understand that the Table of Nations resolves that whole thing. I'm going to see if I can maybe pull up this chapter in my book so that we can take a look at that, because I think that will really help to just give people a little bit of a graphic there that they can latch onto. So 1 second. Here we go. All right. So here is, so right here on this left column is Ezekiel 38. I call it reflecting the Table of Nations. Then Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, and then the common references in both modern and equivalent. Okay. So son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog. Right. So here we have the sons of Japhet were Gomer, Magog. Right. So we have same places. He's a chief Rosh prince of Meshech and Tubal. Right. We find that these are not every one of them, but so many. Right. But we have Tubal, Meshech. Right. So I mean, are we really to think that back in Genesis chapter 10, he was talking about Moscow and Tbilisi? I don't know. I find that hard to believe. Rather, these are peoples. These are heads of tribes, and then those tribes then branched out as they were disseminated because of the Tower of Babel. Right. So
right.
So I think that's really important to understand is that this is where they all started. All right. So then you have Persia, Cush, Put, right? We have these same people groups that are mentioned in both places. Gomer, right? Gomer's up here. Beit Togarma. We saw Beit Togarma. Where did it go? Somewhere in there, right? But this is what we're looking at. So Gomer is essentially Turkey. Magog is, somewhere Turkey. So yeah, this is the modern areas. But when you compare these two, Ezekiel 38-39 and Genesis chapter 10, we come out with the same people groups, which then again spread out into the entire world. So that's my defense of that whole, of what to do with those people groups in Ezekiel 38-39.
Right. Some would say that you take the the etymology of the words, like you can find Gog in some of the Asian people groups, and some of their older names on maps and that type of thing. So, and then the question becomes, well, somebody will say, well, so-and-so used maps from a guy who studied and put it together in the 17th, 18th, or 19th century, but I have a guy who did it in the 12th century. A map from the 12th. Well, but your guy's still pretty far removed from Ezekiel.
What I did trumps everybody. Okay, and I'm not trying to be arrogant here, but I went back. I know this goes back to ancient Sumer. Okay, we're talking like 3000 BC, right? You can't go back any further than that. So I went back as far as you can go with this word, and I stand on that. All right. So this word Gog means death or enmity. Simple. Right. And it just happens to be the same guy, Satan, that we've been tracking throughout this whole story in the Bible. It's the same dude. So I'm just
Doug, there's a comment in here that Scott is muted. Is that right?
Yes. For some reason. We'd let him talk, but we can't hear him. Scott, you have to fix your settings somehow. We'd like to hear from you. Really, we would.
Call Doug on his cell phone and he'll hold it up to his mic.
There you go. So here's a question from Joel. He says, how do you reconcile Ezekiel 38-39, Gog and Magog, versus Zechariah's retelling in chapter 14? Why does Zechariah 14 seem to place the event at the Achet Hayomim, the end of days, and Christians tend to place Gog Magog way too early? And this is related to a question that Joel had earlier in the broadcast, where he was asking, could it be that imminency tends to cloud our views? And I would definitely say that it clouds our views. When I was a pre-trib rapturist, we had it all figured out, and Ezekiel 38-39, that had to happen first. And there's going to be this big war, and then it's going to come back, then essentially, obviously the rapture is going to happen and all that stuff. And so I think because there was this incredible expectation that any moment now we're going to get raptured out of here, they're just always looking for the next event. I remember back in 2005, Ahmadinejad, the then president of Iran, he was, trying to, what do you call it? The word for nuclear, plutonium, trying to enrich plutonium or enrich uranium. And, I was like, oh my goodness, this is it, right? We are going to be out of here any second because, man, we're just right there. But I really think it's kind of wishful thinking, because you have a system that says, hey, we're going to be out of here. And so when we start seeing little things happening in the Middle East or in Russia or whatever, then there's a sense to just jump on that and say, well, we're out of here. And again, I want to make it clear. I think it's very significant what Putin and Russia are doing. I'm not saying that it has no bearing. I'm simply saying that it's not what the Bible talks about. Now, Pat Robertson came out a few days ago, and he was saying that this is now God somehow is just directing Putin to do this stuff, right? And I was like, oh my goodness, it made such a terrible headline. Because here the secular media picks this up. They're like, oh, I guess that, God's into having Putin invade Ukraine or something like that. And, it just, I don't think it's going to season well, or it's going to age well, because, he made a comment based on that particular model that I would argue is flawed. And it just creates a lot of confusion.
Yeah, but the one thing too is, this I appreciate what you said. I think what's going on is in conjunction with all this other stuff. I mean, I was reading some stuff today, Doug, about KPMG put out this report about technology and digital IDs, and it's just this convergence, as I talk about, this convergence of stuff that's happening everywhere so quickly. And when you look at it in a contemporary mode and try to build it into a Bible prophecy model, I mean, there's a lot happening right now. I mean, there's stuff we don't even really talk about on here with regard to preparation for a temple or sacrifice and that sort of thing. So there's just a lot really going on. And I think that what's happened in the last 10 days is completely changing the international order. And we know that when all these things unfold, there will be an international order. And that apple cart has just been completely turned over, in my opinion. And we are beyond where things, there's this, I don't know, the expert that was on our briefing call today and from Israel, she was talking about the fact that we all knew this was going to happen. We knew that Putin was going to do this, but we didn't really, even though we knew it, we didn't quite believe it. And he did it. And now there's no going back to what we used to consider normal of 10 days ago. It's changed.
Wow.
And she's an expert. I mean, she's PhD in, terrorism related issues and geopolitics. So,
wow.
It was just very interesting. And a retired IDF general was also saying, this is, things have changed. And, when you think of it in terms of Israel, there is a big concern there. Like, how does Israel deal with this? Because they have different issues. A week ago, about a week ago, there was a conference of presidents of Jewish organizations, and Yair Lapid, who's the foreign minister of Israel right now and the prime minister in waiting, if he'll come on in about a year to be prime minister. And he was saying that the Syrian border is a Russian border. Well, Doug, all of us who came out of the same mode that you did with regard to Gog, Magog and being Russia and that type of thing, we hear that and everybody's like, wait a minute, the soon-to-be prime minister of Israel says that the Syrian border is a Russian border. And now we have Putin doing something that is very troubling. But, and then you have the Christian community divided, that Putin is restoring Christianity, I'm hearing people say, and other, like me, I think he's a thug, he's KGB, and he's up to no good. There's probably a better way to do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm also looking at the fact that I'm talking to missionaries in Ukraine, and, people are scared to death in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And there could be, in the next few days to the next month, there could be thousands to tens of thousands of people whose eternal destiny is set in stone. And so this is all, it's like a storm, that you've kind of seen coming, and then all of a sudden there's the funnel cloud rolling down your street. It's a troubling time. I don't want to, I'm just telling you, when this guy threatens nuclear war, he means it. Okay. Mm-hmm. He may do it. And how does that change the world? And so I don't know. I mean, now Scott can talk. Do you have, nice. Is his audio on?
It was definitely a record.
Yeah, I know. 8:39. So we make a note of that on March 4th.
And if you hear a meowing in the background, it's a new cat that's not happy that she's locked away 3 doors away, and she's still meowing. So, but I'm the one that suggested this because that's all I've seen is just everything blowing up. Is this Gog Magog? Is this Is Russia going to link up with Iran and Turkey and invade? And I don't know that it's that yet, but it certainly, John, it could lead to that over a period of time if Russia was backed into a corner geopolitically and has to form alliances with China, with the stands, with Iran, with Turkey. That's where I see that it could head and form that alliance that. And I'm looking at it more like, could this be the Red Horseman of the Second Seal saddling up? That's sort of that's my view right now. My understanding is that we've been living the First Seal for about the past 24, 25 months. So,
yeah, I mean, that could very well be the case. I mean, and you could make the case that if Russia is Magog, and these other people groups that now that he's and you look at what's going on in Azerbaijan and Turkey and drones and all this stuff that Putin may decide, well, I can make that path down to the Middle East. I mean, he doesn't have much in the way of an army or anything like that in Syria, but he is in charge of Syria. So when Israel came out and said a week ago, well, we stand with Ukraine, then the Russian ambassador to the UN immediately tweeted out, well, we don't recognize Israel's right to control the Golan Heights. And that was kind of a significant thing. And so now Israel's sitting there thinking like, okay, we got to step gingerly. How do we kind of get our support from the US and Europe, but we don't want to be an enemy of Russia. And so this is all very, very complicated. And I will say Putin's got I think he's got the upper hand right now. He's going to do what he's going to do. And I'm just, Russian experts that I've talked to this week that have lived there say, you have no idea the brutality that he can unleash, and it could be very, very bad. What did they do? They bombed 87 apartment buildings. This is all, I don't know, it's troubling. Have I lost everybody else now?
I'm here.
Okay. I just, everybody, I don't see Doug now. So
I don't see Doug either, but I'm no longer co-host. I had signed out, so I don't know where Doug went.
I just got a text from him. He said his internet went down.
Oh, I was just hoping he got raptured.
So he says, carry on. Okay, well, let's tear apart Corrupting the Image 3 while he's not here to defend it.
Problem is, well, I agree with a lot of what he writes. I can't pick on him too much on that. Now we could talk some other issues.
So here's Daniel Penn. Daniel, you have a comment. Putin is in a corner from the world. I believe that he's going to make a deal with the Muslim countries. And yes, this is Ezekiel 38, 39. So don't know that I agree with you that it is Ezekiel 38 and 39. But I do agree, and I've known this for a while, about 20 to 25% of Russia is a Muslim population right now. And we know that the Stan countries, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, those used to be part of the Soviet Union. So if those were still part of the Soviet Union, the percentage of Muslims in the Russian population would be even greater. And that 40%, process this, 40% of the Russian army is Islamic today. And Russia's declining demographically and that type of thing. So, I mean, Iran's declining demographically. And so when I see these things, these guys that run these places know this. And they have an ultimate goal, at least Iran does. It's been stated over and over again, the destruction of Israel. And so I'm trying to think what I want to say here. The pressure to do something in a nearer term. Now, it may be years down the road, but yeah, I could make the case that Russia will enter into an alignment with the Islamic nations, particularly in light of getting sanctions and that type of thing. That may drive him that way. He's already made an alliance with China. And then there were a number of reports over the last couple of weeks that, I mean, these were headlines in papers from the Middle East that there was this new China, Russia, Iran alliance. And so, I mean, I hear people discount, oh, China has nothing to do with anything and at the end times. And I just don't agree with it. You take a nation that has a fifth of the world's population, I just don't think you can get rid of it. Doug had his near-death experience, and now he's back with us. So,
and John, if we're at the end of the age to believe that a power like Russia, unless it is taken out or brought to its knees, or a power like China or America is not involved in end times, is borderline crazy, in my opinion. If you just take a purely 3,500, 3,000 year ago, 2,000 year ago look at prophecy and only focus on those countries, when again, I believe that what happened with that fourth Daniel 2, the two iron legs that represented Rome, just expanded and morphed and devolved into the feet and the 10 toes. And I know that my understanding right now in Daniel 7 is that those three beasts, those three kingdoms, are not referring to Babylon, ancient Persia, Greece. That those kingdoms are referring to end time kingdoms. And to be honest, right now, I don't know that it's a coincidence that that second beast is a bear, and you've got the Russian bear. Now, whether or not the leopard is China, or the first one would be sort of this Western alliance, the English-speaking nations, and then what this final beast is. I believe the final beast is sort of the amalgam of a final one world government after maybe those first three are might destroy each other, might kill each other in war, certainly weaken each other, or the powers that be crash the current system as it is, whether that be through war, famine, plague. That's sort of my understanding, and that I really do believe that we might see this might be the red horse altar judgment getting at least saddled up from a worldwide standpoint. Right now, we're sitting over here comfortably. You know, there's always a threat, but we're not in Ukraine right now. These yahoos that are going, nothing is going on in Ukraine. It's like they're reading the Q conspiracy posting. No, seriously.
Yeah.
This is all a fake war. And I mean, a guy that attends our Shabbat dinner, he was over there. He married a Ukrainian lady. She's 6 months pregnant. They were over there trying to work on her paperwork to get her to America, and all this broke out. And yeah, they're in Poland now. They had to flee Kyiv, when all this started happening. And thankfully they got into Poland, but her family's still in Ukraine.
Yeah. Hey, I just want to really stress that we don't know when the end is, right? Roughly 100 years ago or 80 years ago, when we had World War I and World War II, those were terrible events, and they look like the end of the world. If you were to have lived through those or to have died in them, you might have thought that was the end of the world, and that was pretty terrible. But I'm not convinced that we find Hitler in the Bible. We find types of Hitler in the Bible. We don't find Hitler specifically. So, the only way we're going to know absolutely what role Putin has, if he has any kind of a biblical role, is when we get to the end and we look back, we're like, oh, you're this guy in the Bible. But,
I agree with you that that's the way it's going to work out. That we'll be looking back and say, oh yeah, that's exactly how it's going to.
Right. But, but again, assuming that, maybe the Lord comes back in 50 years, 100 years, it could be that our charts are way off, and it could be this is a blip. This is a terrible blip. It could even escalate into something very large. But, just because we've always been conditioned to think that World War III is the end of the world, Well, it could certainly be world changing, but it may not be what we think it is. And so I really think we have to proceed with great caution when we start looking at the headlines and saying, well, this is that. And we need to understand that it has to fit exactly, right? Whatever the Bible says, that has to happen exactly for it to be biblical prophecy. If it's like 75%, then it's not biblical prophecy, right? And so that's part of the challenge I think we have to really be careful about. But I would also encourage people that whenever God gives something, like a really big thing, like Ezekiel 38-39, he doesn't just say it kind of a one-off. He's like, well, I'm going to just say it to this prophet. He's going to say it to a whole bunch of prophets. And he did. He said it to Isaiah. He said it to John in the book of Revelation, right? So we see all these different things talking about this amalgamation of the world forces coming together to fight specifically against Israel, not Ukraine. Again, it's tragic what's happening in Ukraine, but that is not biblical, right? So I just really have to underscore that, because otherwise we're going to say that the sky is falling every day and think that it's the end of the world when it's not.
Yeah,
but I think we can talk about the fact that it may lead to.
I'm open to that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the world can change.
Yep.
Very quickly today.
Yes,
I mean,
indeed.
the stuff that I saw today would be, if I was trying to put it into a talk, I don't have time to read about it and put it into a talk or even write a book or a pamphlet about it. It's just too much. That's my opinion. I mean, just with the technocracy and computers and digital IDs and all this other stuff that's happening at the same time, apart from this Russian thing, Bitcoin, blockchain, all this, which I think is becoming very significant.
And I don't think it's a coincidence when John speaks a lot about the convergence of events. I just don't think it's a coincidence that, again, I'm going to say they're telling us their plans. And if we could rewind our clocks to 2019 and be discussing this show in 2019 and say, hey, in a year, the entire world economy is going to be starting to shut down. People are going to be quarantined for 3 months over a virus that has a 99% survival rate. And what has happened, and we're going to print money like crazy, and we're going to, I mean, again, if you went back and see how much the world has changed since 3 years ago, or even since 2 years ago, and how quickly, if major weapons of mass destruction are used in any future conflict, and here's it. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I say this a lot. If I did not believe the Bible, I could get on board with a one world government, because it's only a matter of time before some crazy madman does use nuclear weapons. That's going to really affect the world.
And add on to this too, I think Connie makes a good point. And I was texting with a farmer friend today about what's the deal with fertilizer. And, the word, it's pretty accurate that this year farmers worldwide may only get 25% of their normal allotment of fertilizer.
Wow.
And the crops are very dependent. The GMO crops they're dependent because they've been genetically altered to require that, as opposed to more organic natural fertilizers.
Yeah. So somebody called me up today and said, listen, do I need to go out and store up a little bit of food and stuff? And she goes, and my advice to her was, don't wait till next Thursday. Okay. I mean, I don't want to be, I don't want to be Chicken Little, but I think that's the reality. I mean, this is the real world that we live in now. I mean, our gas price went up 50 cents today.
And it's never a bad idea to at least have 6 months to a year of staples, no matter what. And not just from a war or anything like that, but that's just not a bad idea for anybody that can do it. I mean, I know not all families can do it. And that's where, if and when these things do unfold, I do believe that's where his people, the church, the ecclesia will be stepping up.
And as I've said, I've been building up my famine-ready body for many years now. So,
but you're losing weight now, John.
I know I've lost some weight, but it's I still have some reserve here built up. And I used to joke that all those people who had those those narcissists that have 13.1 and 26.2 stickers on the back of their car. It's a half marathon and a marathon. So just find those and follow them home and make a note of the address, because they're the skinny people. They won't live that long in a family. So you can go over and get their stuff.
That's great. So
that's Joe the practical advice for tonight.
Joe makes a point. He says, to know Putin is to know Alexander Dugin, his philosophical advisor. When you hear Putin scream about Nazis, keep in mind he hates Roman Catholics, which are Nazis to him. Putin is Eurasia proud. So it's a interesting thought. Thank you, Joel.
Well, this is and Dugin is a spiritual mystic guy.
Putin
views himself as someone who's going to heal the schism within the Orthodox Church. The Ukrainians broke off 30 years ago. This is Vladimir Putin. He believes, I think in 2005, he said that the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, so a century in which there were 2 world wars and a Holocaust of proportions not really seen in history, he said was the greatest tragedy of that century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. So he has this view of him. And so the Russian Orthodox Church is very nationalistic. I think it's a lot of anti-Semitism built in there too. And so he views that he's going to restore this, and he has these advisors to do it. So I've talked a lot about that. So.
Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you.
And I see this, again, I see this sort of as an ancient type of spiritual schism, an East versus West. Roman Catholicism split into the Eastern and Western empires, and then you had obviously the Western Empire said no, we're the head bishop, and then you've had the schism. You've had this schism for years, and I don't adhere obviously to the historicism only view, but as far as Rome and wanting to dominate the world, I mean, we all grew up in a non-Roman Catholic dominated world, whereas if we had lived back around 500, 600 years ago, or in certain countries, and we're leaving Mama Rome, we might have had to do so quietly or might not have lived the next day. So again, this is a spiritual component to this. I'm not saying all Catholics are evil. I'm certainly not saying all Orthodox are evil, but the entity itself, it doesn't have a good history. And I don't blame Putin for not wanting to come up under the control of the West and of the church again. So I do see that this does have a component, but I'm also not full down into the rabbit hole on this, historicism.
Well, right. I think too, you make a good point though, that, and maybe this has been one of my points all along, is that, in the time of the Reformation, 500 years ago, the church's core doctrine of justification was all messed up and it had to be reformed. But then if that core doctrine was messed up, then you could say, well, eschatology was messed up. And so this reformation or rediscovery of eschatology and that type of thing, as more people were able to read the scriptures that had been denied to them for a long time, then I think the eschatology development and discussion and that type of thing sort of follows after that Reformation. That's just my view. But Doug, could you answer this? There's Fabio Hurt has a question. I'm delayed in the teaching discussion. Could someone ask on my behalf? I'm wondering where the Antichrist and Gog and Magog fall in together. He might have missed a little bit of the discussion at the beginning. Why don't you give your thought?
Yeah. So Fabio, it's my opinion that Gog and the Antichrist or beast are exactly the same guy. All right. And as I articulate in my book, Corrupting the Image, Volume 3, I think that the beast is going to be an avatar. He's going to be basically Satan in the flesh. And so when you talk about Satan, the beast, they're kind of like one of the same thing. We see that Satan is going to give his power, throne, and his great authority to the beast, right? So he's basically plugging in, right? That's the same thing. And as I said, Gog, it means enmity or death. That's going all the way back as far as you can, back to ancient Sumerian language. You can't go back any further than that. That's bedrock, right? So it just tells us that this is the one that God talked about by all his prophets over all those years. This is talking about Satan. There is no other enemy number one than Satan. And now, again, could Russia be involved somehow in this? I'm not saying they can't, but I'd be very careful to suggest that they are somehow like they're the end time boogeyman. I just don't see that. And that's, I think, a big mistake that people are coming to, because, and I don't think that we're in the seals yet. The two witnesses have not come yet. So now it could get super ugly between now and the arrival of the two witnesses. I have no qualms about that. Well, I do, but as far as that happening, it could certainly happen. But, the two witnesses, when they show up, then the end is near. Okay, so until we see those guys, we're not there yet.
Well, but you're making an assumption that the seals are contained in the final 70 years, and I found this fascinating that and again, I really respect her research, that Halisa went and did some research, and that the ancient rabbis were predicting an 18 to a 30-month plague. Rabbi so-and-so said 18, Rabbi Akiva said 30, and that there would be a plague that would affect the entire world. And prior to the final 7 years of this age. So, I don't know where they found that or how but they based it on the siege of Jerusalem and some of the prophecies that are in the Torah.
Yeah, but Akiva also said Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. So that
no. I just gave that name as an example, okay. Doug. It wasn't Rabbi Akiva that said that. I was just saying Rabbi A said 18 months, Rabbi B said 30 months. In other words, how but my point is that that we have seen a worldwide plague. I don't think it's a coincidence that this rider carries a toxon, and myself and Curtis and Michael did a show on that, where we thought and I still think we are in the first seal right now. I just don't think it's coincidence that the rider wears a Stephanos, a crown, and the WHO symbol is a wreath. It's an ancient crown. And so you've got this what we now know. I mean, I think only your diehard mainstream media followers who deny what's coming out now that strands in the virus were patented by Moderna would deny that this was a manufactured virus created by men. And John and I have listened to enough witnesses by the way, to that when Rand Paul had Fauci on the stand, was that not the best? It was his best attempt not to perjure himself, John. I mean,
it was not what?
Would you say that? Did you watch where Rand Paul was grilling Fauci about the gain of function and the Wuhan lab, and he was doing his best not to lie under oath, but basically confessing that that's what we did. But
I agree with you, and it was a classic.
Doug is smirking, but
it was good. It was good cross-examination. As somebody described to me as sort of taking a pencil or a rod and ramming it through somebody's head, and then grabbing on with both hands and steering the witness where you want him to go. It's a very effective picture of cross-examination, and Scott knows this as a trial lawyer. So, so I guess from my standpoint tonight, I mean, I've seen a lot of really great comments here. So Joel says, did I ask your Orthodox Jewish friends? I did ask Orthodox Jewish, religious Orthodox, not like a Hasidic, but Orthodox, and his comment was that his rabbis teach that Gog Magog is Eastern Turkey in the area up into Georgia, Tbilisi, into the Caucasus Mountains, which is, so I guess my point is that I think you need to learn these different views of Bible prophecy, because I think there's some validity to all of them, depending on how the way this thing unfolds. But I do think that, the struggle will be when it actually happens to come out and say this is that. And I think people are too quick to say this is that. For example, I don't think this is Ezekiel 38 and 39. Could it lead to that? Yeah. But look at the logistical issue. Russia's bogged down a bit in Ukraine. They have tremendous military power. But, for them to do, look at how much trouble they're having with supply chains in the 40 miles, the last 40-mile push to Kiev. They're running out of fuel. They're running out of food. And I think that's a valid report that's coming out of this. And so now stretch that supply chain thing. If this is who is invading Israel, they've got a supply chain issue. They've got to get the fuel. They got to get, they just don't magically appear on the mountains of Israel.
Logistics. Yeah.
You got to get in a plane. That's the technology of today. So maybe they'll be teleporting by then. I don't know, but I don't see that on the near horizon.
Y'all haven't discussed it yet. I was listening to y'all while I was in timeout, but I personally believe that Ezekiel 38 and 39 are not necessarily the same events in the timeline. That it could be two separate events. One, obviously, per what Doug, I would say is the end of this age. I will not say end of this world, because that's not what the Bible teaches, and too many people talk about it's the end of the world. So I think that event, especially, that's almost certain the end of this age. And then the other event could be something that happens before the end of the age. That's sort of my understanding of it. So in other words, but this isn't it yet. Now, if all of a sudden, like I said earlier, if Russia is pariah and forms an alliance with Iran, and Turkey, finishes its schism with NATO and the West, and they fall back in line with Islam, and then you've got this alliance between the Islamic nations and the Orthodox nations, and then that's going to take time. And if all that starts happening, that's a different discussion. But this war in Ukraine right now, it's certainly not the Gog Magog invasion of Israel at this time.
Right. Yeah, Fabio has another question. He says, is there a possibility that Gog and Magog are a code name for Babylon, and isn't that war a post-millennium? So, yeah, Fabio, I think you missed it. I was talking about how if you understand that the word Gog means enmity or death, then that becomes really just, it's one more of the epithets or names that Satan has had throughout his long history. And so God is just giving him yet one more name to talk about. And this is how we can understand how the Gog can be at the end of this age, as Scott is pointing out, and after the 1,000-year reign, after the millennium. As far as being a code name for Babylon, yes, I mean, absolutely. We see that the king of Babylon, Isaiah 14, is indeed Satan, or Halel, who is Enlil. Okay, so all these names come together. That's in Corrupting Image Volume 2. If you haven't checked that out, I'd encourage you. I want to let people know. Scott's laughing.
I got my friend texted me. Let me read it to you. Yeah. This is from Curtis, who was our guest a little while ago. He said, "Tell them Gog and Magog is Russia, and all dispensational theology is coming true. The temple will be rebuilt, and animal sacrifices will commence shortly after the 7-year peace treaty is signed within the next few weeks. This, of course, means the rapture will happen in the next few days." Got it?
Yeah. I just want to let people know. Yeah. So if you want my book, you can certainly go to my website. I have all the articles there. If you can't afford it, if you want to buy it, if you want to, whatever you want to get it, just send me an email. I'll send it to you. I'll send you the ebook if you can't afford it. So don't feel like money is keeping you back. But I'd like for you guys to read this. So that really is the most important thing for me, is that you just take a look at it, because I think I lay it all out there. As to show some of the confusion, this guy, somebody dancer, Gilgamesh is Christ. You got some weird comments like that's just completely off the wall. Gilgamesh is not Christ. Anyway, moving on. So yeah.
This is my concern right here. In all honesty, we're already at sort of, and it wouldn't have to be a nuclear exchange. If there's some type of major cyber attack that can shut down, you know, our power grid, bank system, things of that nature. I mean, can you imagine what would happen to the West? Not just America, but to the West. And I think that would throw us back about 200 years, with 99% of the population not having a clue how to survive the way that our ancestors survived. I mean, we're a bunch of softies. So we are.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and to add on to that, I was listening to some interviews of Yuval Harari, he wrote Sapiens, or whatever his book was, about, you know, hacking humankind, and him, you know, just he's talking about, hey, you know, we've got it all figured out though. Now we're gonna, you know, hack humanity, and it's going to be better for everybody. We're going to have these implants and all this other stuff, and they're going to change. You're going to know what your sexual orientation is and everything about you just as you go outside to take a walk down the street. And, you know, and then KPMG sort of saying the same thing in this report I just read today. So, I mean, I'm just talking about, you know, stuff you talk about, Doug, about the technological development, and it's crazy. It's just, I want to just go back. I want to go back to 30 days ago. I kind of liked it. I liked it a lot better then than I do now.
Yeah.
And I've said this. I do believe. I really am hoping that right now. And again, I'm not. You know, y'all know this by now. I'm not dogmatic that we're definitely like in the first seal. But if we're in the first seal and this is the opening of the second seal, I just hope that Jesus takes a long time saddling up the horse, and that we have another year or 2 or 3 before he, you know, gets fully out of the barn and on the way. Because again, I don't think we're given a strict timeline on the seals, as far as that they must fall within this final 7-year window. I think that's something that I know I learned of that part of it, sort of through John Walvard and Charles Ryrie and Tim LaHaye, and that's where I learned that everything has to be compacted into this final 7 years. But I do believe that the second seal rider could start before then. It could be that, you know, this leads to this final 7 years. Who knows? I don't think we should be dogmatic about much, other than Jesus is coming back and he's giving us a lot of signs, and we're actually seeing a lot of things starting to unfold. So,
my friend Alan asked a question. Do any of you think Putin is losing control? And I think, knowing Alan, that he means, is he going insane? Has he gone mad? I think he knows exactly what he's doing. I made some notes from my briefing time today with an organization called IDSF, Israeli Defense and Security Forum. And Anat Hochberg-Maron is her name, a terrorism expert, and she's been studying this for well over 20 years. And she said, what has happened is not a surprise. He's doing exactly what he has planned to do for a long time. We in the West do not understand what's going on. But the problem is we do not understand what we do not understand. He knows exactly what he's doing. and he's got a plan and he's sticking to it. So I think there's a lot of wishful thinking that he's going mad and the Russians are going to rise up and take him out. I even know the Russian Orthodox bishops came out today and said the guy, he's acting incorrectly. He should not be doing this. And I think that this is just in some respects, as Dr. Hochberg Marone said today, wishful thinking. And there's no reason to think that your wishful thinking is actually going to come true.
Here's something that I've little small view about the foxes and Samson as a type, obviously a very sinful type, but a type of Messiah, and how he talks about the foxes that spoil the vineyard. And Lisa did a teaching on this, and I started thinking about how the foxes, Jesus called Herod a fox, but how Samson, in order to defeat the Philistines, in order to he caught, I think it was 300 foxes, tied them by their tails, put torches between them. That's an interesting word, torch there. And then they went through the standing grain, the stored grain, and the olive groves of the Philistines, destroying it. And again, when we see that these seals are coming from the throne, the main purpose is to get repentance. And you would hope and pray, obviously, that this type of event would be getting a lot of unbelievers' attention, to get them to repent. In other words, I believe the same thing with what we've seen the last 2.5 years, that this is God just gently flapping his wings right now. And even unless you're in Ukraine or Russia, this is not dire straits yet, but it's making people think, and it can be used by us to maybe, not the end is nigh, this is the end of the world coming tomorrow, but maybe get people. I mean, a lot of my heathen friends, they're really worried about what's going to happen. And they've been, a lot of people do think, there could be something major that happens tomorrow, next week, like you said, John, or next month. I mean, so I do believe that what with the seals being from the throne, if this is the second seal, again, the purpose, the why is to get both the church, his people, and all people that are outside the kingdom to repent. And I think that's the main focus of even, especially if we do believe that we're approaching the end of this age, that needs to always be the message: repent and believe the gospel of the kingdom. So.
It's a crazy time. I think we're probably out over time, but
indeed, yeah.
Great discussion tonight.
Bottom line, for me, I don't think that Putin or Russia are the fulfillment of Ezekiel 38-39. Obviously, other people do. Scott thinks that the seals may have opened already. I do not. I think that things could get a whole lot worse, and then some Savior is going to come on the world who will be a hero, not a bad guy, right? So he only turns out to be a bad guy at the very end, not at the very beginning. So I think that's one more reason why Ezekiel 38-39 and or Putin cannot be happening. Well, Putin's happening, but he cannot be Ezekiel 38-39 because when the beast first comes on the scene, he's hailed as a hero. The world loves this guy, and the whole world is united against Israel. And we're nowhere near that. Nor have we seen the two witnesses come on the scene. So I just don't think we're that close. But to each his own.
I mean, I bought and sold today. I'm not getting. Yeah. I'm in Alabama. I'm not getting persecuted yet. And like you said, everybody hates Israel. And again, when you look at Israel, in this broader picture view, it means they hate you and me and John and all who have faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And again, I believe that is our brother Judah, who is still blind and deaf to Yeshua predominantly being Messiah. But I do include them in the house, if you will. God's got a plan for our brother Judah.
Scott's got that green light flashing behind him. I think it's in code. It's some kind of code.
That's my handy dandy stapler. But at least the
Awesome.
cat's been quiet.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, hey,
It's-
thank you,
You
everybody.
hypnotized it with that that flashing
Yeah.
light.
We just want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thanks, everybody. We'll be here next week, assuming the world's still here, which I'm pretty sure it's going to be. So, yeah, repent. Really, that's the word. So just walk humbly with your God. Micah 6:8. He's shown you, a man, what's good, what the Lord requires of you. Walk, do justly, walk humbly, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Get those three things right. Everything else will take care of itself.